Welcome to Real Estate 360 Live with Ryan Sloper, the trusted name in real estate radio. Now, here's Ryan Sloper.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper. For those of you not familiar with our podcast, we do a podcast each and every week on all things real estate, from interest rates, the economy, to what's happening in Washington, anything that affects our national real estate markets, our local real estate markets will be covered here. Like I said, we're not your traditional real estate podcast where we're going to be touting that it's a great time to buy every single time we come on here. The reality is that, we have a low interest rate environment. We've had that for some time now, but the markets aren't moving as many of the media would have had us believe at some point in time, and now real estate has really become backpage news. And really only because there's nothing positive to say about it. Obviously, there are anomalies in the market, and that happens all over the place. We have New York, D.C., San Francisco. There's some outliers there where, we've had still rising prices. But I'm starting to see even in those areas that things are starting to tail off. And the reason being is because the investors are starting to see there's a correction that's taking place. Now, one would think with the ability to have, access to cheap capital, low interest rates, that it would continue to go up. But when you don't have production and you don't have wages rising as you need, then really it's hard to continue that trend. And we're going to be seeing, I think, the same thing in the stock market. So we're jumping into a couple things today. We're going to talk about if we believe that Wall Street is actually ready for a correction, a major correction ahead. We've had a lot of international geopolitical events taking place over the last week. We'll cover those. We'll also talk, a little bit more in depth about our part-time economy and all the part-time workers that are, basically coming to the job market. Not many full-time positions. Nothing's new there. Joining me on our panel, as he does each and every week, is Louis Camerosano. He's a former school teacher, a former attorney, and a former general manager of a major real estate portal. Louis is often cited in the media as a real estate industry expert. He's been cited in Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Fox Business, USN, MSN, and numerous others. Louis, how you doing today?
Hi, Ryan. I'm doing grand. How are you?
I'm doing well, sir. Good to have you back as always.
Thank you.
So, last week we kind of talked about, the recovery and this so-called recovery that all the media wants to tout. They find any one thing to hang their hat on, and they consider it a win, a victory, right? A victory for the economy. Everything is turned
for the recovery.
Right. It's another point on the board for the recovery, and it's getting to be a bit absurd. I mean, because you just start reading these headlines, and you can pretty much go every single day and find some site or a major news outlet that is spinning news that way. Now, we do last week, we had quite a lot of stuff going on, especially internationally. U.S. was dropping bombs in Iraq again, and Russia was sending more and more troops to the Ukraine border, which was interesting because they basically said that, Russia's claiming they're trying to de-escalate the crisis there, but they continue to send more and more troops there, right? Well, what happens when all this is taking place is money flows to the safe haven of bonds. So we actually had, at some point last week, the 10-year note had reached one of its lows in a really long time, which is, once again, Louis, we started talking about, everybody was prognosticating that interest rates were going to move up, but yet we have interest rates once again moving back down, right?
And it's not helping, though, but it's not helping the real estate market.
Correct. It's not. It really doesn't mean anything. Like, typically, that would be some sort of indicator that the people that were on the sidelines would be jumping in, right? Like, you would think, oh, wow, we've got another uptick. So now
they're just not on the sidelines.
Right. And
they're off the field.
I don't know if you've seen this, but there's been a couple articles, and I can't remember the source, but many people are now saying that it's, and I think that this is a move by many of these analysts to say that, they realize that things aren't moving as they hoped and as they wished, that now it's real estate agents' jobs to really push people to want to buy houses, right? That it's their jobs to want to do that. Well, if it was
is it their job to find them? Is it their job to find them jobs and get them financing and get them accredited? Come on.
correct. But you know what happens, Lewis, is that these analysts that were, saying that, this is a great time to buy, and it looks like
people just don't realize it.
Right, and people just don't realize it. So now it's our job to educate these people and tell them why, they've got, maybe 2 months reserves in their bank account, that they do have the means to be able to buy a house. It's kind of sad, actually, because if we were in a strong economy, if we were in a recovering economy, you wouldn't have to tell people anything. They would feel good about it. They would
exactly.
They would say, you know what, I've got a good job. It looks like I'm getting a raise again this year. I've got money saved up in the bank. I've paid up all my debt. I'm in a position to be able to buy a house. But that's not what's taking place here. And it doesn't take a professional to have to tell anybody that they're ready to buy. Now, somebody could be on the fence and maybe not very astute on, renting versus buying and, of course, what their monthly payment would be. And if they do have access, get 100% financing. I do agree that there's some education that takes place there where many people don't know all of the available options.
Sure.
And that really is the job of the professional, to get that information out there to people. Because,
absolutely.
In certain areas, not as much in the metropolitan area because the prices are much higher, but in some of the more rural areas or areas where there's not as many jobs, there is still access to 100% financing, USDA financing, U.S. Department of Agriculture.
But you can't educate somebody into a job and into a raise and into being able to afford a home.
And you're right. And you can't educate them to go and find a full-time position because there's really not any full-time positions out there. They're having to really take part-time positions, and if not 2 or 3 of them, which when you're going to apply,
they're trying to say there's a recovery. You just don't realize it. It's a case of what if they held a recovery and no one came? Well, they don't believe the story. In fact, there was a Gallup poll out this morning. It said only 1 in 10 U.S. investors are aware of the bull market's strong gains. That it went up 30% last year. That's because they're not involved in it.
Right.
The mainstream media is doing its job promoting the recovery. It's just that people aren't participating.
Yeah,
there's a recovery going on for the, to use the class warfare term, the 1%. But there isn't a recovery for everybody else.
Correct.
People aren't getting richer. Their wages aren't rising. And we see inflation in pricing, food, energy, housing. Also, Ryan, home prices are more expensive now.
Correct.
You're telling people, hey, good time to buy. No, 2 years ago was a good time to buy. 3 years ago, maybe. Not now.
Right.
But they couldn't buy 2 or 3 years ago either.
And that's the ironic part is like even when interest rates were low 2 or 3 years ago, they could buy. Who was mainly buying were investors. Right now, granted, we're sitting here saying that there are obviously people that were buying, but it wasn't the largest percentage of buyers that were in the market were actual, people that were not investors. Investors, at one point were making up like 50% of the transactions. First-time home buyers was such a small percentage of the overall, home sales that it really kind of tells you where the economy was at, because you would expect for that piece of the market to be much higher in a low-interest rate environment, especially
normally, what is it, 40% first-time home buyers historically in the last 10, 20 years? Now it's down to 25%.
Oh, well, exactly. And one of the key reasons why I would expect that to be the case also is because those first-time home buyers, they didn't get caught up in the last downturn of the housing crash when, people are still have houses that have negative equity positions. They don't really have that. They've just been renting or living with a parent trying to save up money. But obviously they're saving up money or not saving money and still living with their parents. And that looks like that is a trend that's probably going to continue. We talked about the age groups of, anywhere from 21 to 35. Those aren't the jobs that are actually picking up. We have basically senior citizens are the ones that are willing to accept low-paying jobs now.
Right. But you know what they're blaming it on, Ryan? They're just starting in the media to blame student loans and millennial unemployment on a lack of a housing recovery. But they're really still clinging to this concept that there's a lack of inventory, and that's really what's holding back the housing recovery. They've been going on about that for a couple of years now, that's the problem. If only there were more homes for sale, the housing recovery would be more robust, and we've seen inventory increase and sales go down. It's not the case. But yet again, last week there was an article in CNBC, and the the first sentence started off with the same nonsense. You know, one of the problems with the housing recovery has been a lack of inventory. No, there's been a lack of demand because there's a lack of buyers because people don't have jobs. And there's a lack of first-time home buyers because they don't have jobs. There's not because there's a lack of inventory.
Right.
So there is a lack of inventory. The lack of inventory is actually a positive, the only positive thing in the housing market, because it allows them to charge higher prices for the few people who do want to buy the homes.
And the lack of inventory is also preventing the market from becoming saturated, which would put further downward pressure on prices.
No, they think that prices would. You're absolutely right, Ryan. But their narrative goes: if there were more houses for sale, more would get sold, and prices would rise further. No, if there were more houses for sale, there'd be even few people to buy them, and the prices would drop. They should count their lucky stars that there's no inventory or low inventory.
Yeah, and we've already seen. I mean, at least in my markets, I've seen a major shift where it's pretty much a buyer's market all the way around now. I mean,
here too, Ryan.
You'll obviously have those houses that are, like your model homes that might be the home that 5 or 10 people that are going after, and that one's going to sell at retail price. But the majority of the homes that aren't up to snuff are the ones that are going to sit on the market. They're going to end up giving much more concessions to the buyer. They're going to end up lowering their price down. So, like I said, in the whole goal, and part of my job, obviously, makes it a little bit more difficult, but I have to explain to people that, their home has to show as if it is a model home. And if it doesn't, don't expect top dollar.
Ryan, I'll give you examples here. We had 3 homes, all priced around $400,000. One was fixed up, very nice, but had its issues, and not because it wasn't staged properly and looking good. That went down to $349,000. The other one went from $399,000, didn't sell for months, went to $349,000, didn't sell, is now on the market for $299,000. They haven't done anything with it. Wow. And the third one opened up at $399,000, and people just looked at it and said, "You got to be kidding me." They've reduced it to $349,000, still hasn't sold. Then the houses that came on the market, one fixed up their home. They realized, the new comps now are not $399,000, they're closer to $349,000. One put it up at $379,000, which was smart. Maybe you'll get $349,000. Someone else fixed it up and put theirs up at $420,000. It's not going to happen.
Right. Yep.
And so you're seeing the downward pressure where the good houses will sell. Now, the one for $419,000 eventually will sell, but not for $419,000.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and I've had even.
And that means the price appreciation is over.
It definitely is over, and that's why I always. And this is interesting because I had a client that came to me last week and was considering. He actually was trying to time it out where he could sell his house and then buy a brand new home for a builder come like next March, because it would take about 6 months for the home to be delivered from the builder and be built anyway. But I had to kind of have the talk with him where I already was seeing downward pressure on prices, and he was thinking about maybe just putting his house on the market come like right beginning of next year. And I said, well, we don't really know where the market's going to be after we go through the winter, right? Because typically we're going to see a seasonal downward pressure on prices as we go into November, December, January, February. And I told him the best thing to probably do is to probably try to sell it now. He did have a place that he could stay in the meantime while that house was being built. He could also save up some more money. But one of the conversations that I had was not necessarily about how much money he was going to net. Obviously, he needs X amount of dollars in order to buy another house.
Right.
But he did have access. He had access to other capital, retirement accounts, and some other things that he could potentially take to put a down payment on the new home. And the conversation that I had with him, and he was speaking with another agent as well, and the other agent was basically telling him, well, hey, if you're going to buy from me, then I'll list your house for $0, right? Like, I'm not going to take a commission on that side. Well, I had that, unfortunately, and that same agent had basically advised him to lower the price by not quite the same 3% that he wasn't going to charge him in commission. And I'm like, well, I don't understand that pricing model, and I also don't understand that you're not going to achieve top dollar by him not taking a commission. That means he's not going to work. That means that he's not going to try to sell this house. And
certainly, he's not even not going to try to sell it. He doesn't care what he sells it for.
Correct. He doesn't. And I said the goal is to net the most amount of money on your home sale, and there's a process of doing that. Went into depth, but at the end of the day, I talked to him more about what his long-term goals were. At the end of the day, it was to get his family out of that neighborhood and into a more family-friendly neighborhood. I said, well, you've already told me specifically than what you want to do. And I said, are you prepared, if you don't sell at a certain price, to not move? Are you prepared to stay in this community for the next 10 to 15 to 20 years and not move? His answer was, no, I have to get out of here. Okay, so you've now set your long-term goals. That's separate from how much money you're going to net on your home sale, right? Because we already found out that he had the resources to be able to make the move, even if his house didn't sell for the highest dollar on the market, which there was already saturation on his street anyway. 2 other houses on the market for sale that have been sitting there for quite some time. So I told him, pricing strategy-wise, if we start out where they're at and they were good-looking homes, chances are we're not going to sell either. And then they're going to find, why are the 3 houses on the same street on the market for 30-plus days and not selling? So somebody can probably lowball you. So your best pricing strategy is to probably come in somewhere in the middle, if not underneath them, and try to get rid of it as soon as possible before your days on the market kills you. Well, so he basically agreed with all this, and at the end of the day, that's why I have the conversation. People are so emotional about the home sale, and they have a number, they have a dollar figure in their head that they have to hit, and if they don't hit it, then they don't want to sell. But the reality is that
forgetting their other goals.
Yeah, you're in order to hit your other goals, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to sell for a certain dollar amount. And
the two don't necessarily coincide.
They don't. And, for him, he had the means, access to other capital that he could make this work, even if he only made like $10,000 on this deal. So I said, obviously, that's not what we're shooting for. But what I don't want you to do is to block yourself from obtaining your long-term goals when it's very important that you get you and your family into another neighborhood, right?
Well, that's you being a proper advisor and helping somebody who has very limited ability to, limited commercial sense and doesn't understand how to put together an entire package such that he's flexible on some things in order to achieve his goal. And you see that today most people don't have that ability. They have no commercial sense. They don't do any type of commerce or trade. They just buy stuff on credit card. So they really don't know how to handle situations. And you're seeing it, on a national stage in the United States. What do you got with Russia, with these sanctions? I don't think that the people putting the sanctions on Russia, the U.S. administration, have any idea what the consequences are. They have it stuck in their head, well, we're the United States, and this is how it has to be. So we just do these things and expect a good result just because, we're the United States. And they're going to cause hyperinflation in the United States, not understanding if their goal is to be, to preserve the dollar, to preserve American hegemony. This is not what you do. Similar to your guy. He doesn't know how to achieve his goal because he's not skilled. And you can excuse him because he's a citizen, but it's hard to excuse, our national leaders for not understanding their bargaining positions. Correct. And that comes from lack of experience and from believing, well, we're the United States, we can do what we want, and not like, for example, Obama was scoffing at Russia, saying, oh, they don't have much of an economy. No one is rushing, no pun intended, to Moscow to get jobs. That misses the point entirely. The point is that Russia has oil. Russia can not deliver the oil to Europe, causing a very major economic slowdown in Europe and causing prices to rise. Similarly, the more deals that Russia does and convinces others not to deal with the U.S. dollar, it reduces the demand for dollars, which means imports to the United States are more expensive, causing inflation. Right. It doesn't mean that the United States has to lose its world reserve currency. All they have to do is effectuate a 5 to 15% demand drop in dollars, and things get more expensive for us. Yep. But they don't seem to understand any of this. They say, it's just Russia, it's just a gas station masquerading as a country. Okay, you can believe that if you want, but that's not the reality of it. And that's going to cause us issues, Ryan, right, with inflation, price inflation. Oh, absolutely. Not necessarily with, and that might, impact home prices as well. We'll have, and what's the Fed going to do when we have price inflation that isn't caused from their money printing, even though they're trying to create inflation by keeping interest rates low? What's going to happen then? There's nothing they can do about it. If there's a demand drop for the dollar, they can try to buy more bonds, which means they have to do QE again. Well, yeah, and that's what we've always said, right? Is like what's the one thing that they can always come back to, and it's QE.
they'll call it something different this time. But you are right. If we do have that price inflation, not caused by what necessarily what they're doing, but external forces, we're in big trouble. We're in big trouble.
Well, what's funny is we're causing it.
Yeah.
Like, it was one thing to push the button on QE and tell everybody, well, you got to accept the fact that we're doing QE. But there's another thing to proactively go out and thumb your nose because they're playing around with Crimea. What they don't understand about Russia is Russians are used to, they're saying, well, they're going to isolate themselves. Isolate from whom? They've been isolated for thousands of years. Historically, they've been removed from Russia. Historically, they've been isolated. Historically, they are used to the concept of suffering. These people don't have a George Kennan on their team. George Kennan was the guy who invented the concept of containment, and he understood Russia back at the end of the World War II and the Cold War. Russian citizens have the concept of suffering is good. If you read Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Pushkin, Turgenev, that's part of their character. So if these sanctions hurt, they're like, bring it on. They lost 20 million people in World War II. The United States, if we have any type of suffering, economic suffering, because of price inflation, and you have 90 million people on food stamps, what are they going to ask for? They're going to ask for more food stamps. Yep. They're not going to just say, well, let's just buck it up and, we've seen hard times before. No, they haven't. When you have an entitlement mentality country versus a country that's steeped in the concept of suffering, and you decide you're going to go tit for tat on sanctions, the country that's interested, that believes in suffering, is going to win. But I view this is Russia's kind of counter to what the United States did to Russia in the 80s. We outspent Russia because we knew they couldn't afford to spend it on military. We bankrupted them. I think what they're doing here, Ryan, is they're trying to bankrupt the United States by forcing us into an economic battle where the United States is forced to do more deficit spending, more QE to support the dollar, and more social spending to support the lower standard of living that they're going to help bring about by putting these sanctions on.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's what the public is going to ask for. And no politician is going to get in front of the people and say, okay, we're going to cut your spending, we're going to cut your Social Security, we're going to cut, and we're going to beat these Russians. No way. People would say, I don't care about the Russians, I need my food stamps.
Well, remember I told you the easiest way to win an election is just to tell them that you're going to increase the food stamps by 30%, right?
And you don't think Russia knows that?
Yeah. Yeah, of course they do. And I mean, the U.S., everybody thinks that we're untouchable, right? Like we've always been known
That's the problem.
Is a superpower, exactly. And the ego is ridiculous at this point. And
it's unjustified nowadays. It's not the industrial power it was 40, 50 years ago. People think, well, they need us because they need our dollars. What?
Yeah, and just because our stock market is valued where it is right now doesn't mean that we are that superpower just because of that. You know what I mean?
Correct.
And I think that's what many people think. Is that just look where the stock market's at. We have to be strong. No, because that is not normal everyday money that's there. Okay, that's the cheap capital that has been put out there by the Fed. I mean, and hedge funds and all this. It's not. I almost want to say it's not real money, right? It's not. It's like this money that was pulled out of thin air.
The rest of the world knows around it. You know what's interesting? On my site, Small Gold, what I did was I have a blog post that shows the top 20 countries in terms of gold reserves. And we know that China and Russia have been buying massive amounts of gold in the last few years, boosting up the reserves. And I'm going to do a blog post called The Importance of Gold to a Nation. And one of the things I noticed is you never hear anybody in the United States talk about, worry about, discuss how strong the U.S. gold reserves are. They don't care. But the rest of the world does. And I did a look on my analytics at who visits that particular blog post, and it gets like 30, 40 visits a day. They're all foreigners. They're interested in knowing which countries have how much gold.
Right.
People from Croatia, people from Romania, people from Russia, people from South Africa, people from all over the world, Singapore. They want to know what the relative positions of gold are in a country's reserve. United States citizens could care less. Why? Because we've been conditioned to think, since they threw us off the gold standard in 1971, all that matters is the dollar. The problem is we don't seem to realize, because we take it as a given, that whenever we want something, we just print the money and we get it. The rest of the world gets it. That's what we do. And they realize that's not real value. and they don't want it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing because, the markets here and the Fed and Wall Street can manipulate the price of gold and silver to make it where, like, people aren't paying attention to it, right? But the rest of the world is on, they've been on notice for some time now that we've been doing this and manipulating gold and silver, right? It's not like they don't feel like that there's some tangible value there. I mean, if we had a currency that was tied to something, tangible like gold and silver, we'd be in big trouble right now because we couldn't just continue to print our way out of the problems that we have.
Right.
And that's really, we're stuck. We've talked about this for a long time, Louis, is that, there really isn't any way out. The way out is essentially going to be hardship for many, many, many people. Because they won't choose that option, though. They'll continue,
absolutely not.
They'll continue to choose the option of print, and then come in behind it, increase social programs, when hyperinflation sets in, they'll have to continue those.
The worst, right, but Ryan, if you have a hyperinflation, that's exactly what people would want. They're going to say, look, this Social Security, this Medicare, it doesn't pay for it. So we're going to have to print more to pay for the increase in inflation, which is going to make it even worse.
Correct. Yeah, I mean, it will come a point in time, Louis, where the dollar, I mean, it's not going to be worth anything. I mean, because
not if it has to pay for everything that the United States citizens want and don't want to work for it, and now it's going to have to pay to police the entire world and to intervene whenever the United States feels it's necessary to intervene. That's very expensive. Put aside the moral and the bloodshed, forget that. Just on a monetary basis, just going in and securing the border. Oh, Obama's asking for how many billion to go and do that? You want to go into Iraq because you want to drop some bombs on some people who are causing trouble in Iraq? Well, that's going to cost money. Syria, you want to intervene in all that costs money. And where does it come from? It doesn't come from the productive capacity. It comes from the printing press.
Correct. And what did the president say? It was the last week where unfortunately he's bound by the Constitution, or else he would just start lining up infrastructure programs all over the place.
Yeah.
And
the problem is the United States citizens no longer understand the benefits of the checks and balances of the Constitution. They understand I need to get what I want, or I support what the president wants, so let him do it.
Yep.
And that's a common feature in the human psyche, that they just want to get stuff done, not realizing if you give somebody the power, especially the power of President of the United States, to get stuff done, you can get a lot of stuff done you don't want done.
Right. Yeah, and for the president to think that just because he would start building roads and bridges and all these other things, it's gonna help the jobs, it's gonna put people back to work. Well, that's fine and dandy, Mr. President, but how are we paying for that? And he
doesn't know, because he's only been taught these are people, Ryan, that think inflation is good, not the inflation caused by the demand for the dollar going down, but the type of inflation that you create by printing more money. They see a car going fast and they see smoke coming out the back, and their reaction is, oh, in order to make the car go fast, you have to have a lot of smoke. So they pollute the engine to make more smoke come out. That doesn't make the car go faster. That just makes more pollution. But that's what they do. They pollute the economic system, thinking that they're going to get inflation, and that's somehow going to drive the economy. No, it's just going to make people poor, because it's going to drive prices higher.
Right.
It's the same thing. You can build these roads to nowhere, bridges. We don't need any bridges or roads. No. We need jobs. Oh, yes, but jobs and bridges, right? Jobs at bridges and roads create jobs.
Right.
That's the mentality.
Well, and then what they don't understand is, it doesn't take, some rocket scientist or, some ridiculous economist to be able to figure out that, okay, the reason why they drive the economy is because they're the ones that have the capital to create those jobs. But if you're putting them in a position to where they're uncertain or unsure about what's going to take place in the future, they don't like what's taking place with the healthcare system. It's going to cause more. So they're outsourcing everything. They're taking their businesses overseas, and their answer is to turn around and try to come after them, prevent this stuff from happening. That's not
right.
the answer.
Right. They're trying to stop them from going overseas.
Right. I mean, that's not.
Change the rules. Don't try to stop them.
Right. I mean, do you think there's going to be an uproar from people if you ease the tax base for companies so that they could hire more? Yeah, you're not bringing in as much revenue, but you're going to be more productive. Like, it's just counterintuitive. Everything they do, it works against us. And, I mean, I don't understand how there's not somebody that can explain this. And nobody even asked the questions. I think that's our bigger point, Louis, is that we can't even get basic questions answered anymore. Right?
Right. Well, that's because it's the educational system is all run by the government, so they teach from day one, or they don't teach certain things you need to know, and they teach things that you really shouldn't know about Keynesian economics. So you just assume that government spending is what creates jobs, and that the government creates money, and the government is responsible for the economic health of the nation. And that's not true.
Well, it's no coincidence that our country is essentially bankrupt if we didn't have a printing press. It's no coincidence that the majority of people in the United States mismanage money themselves. Right?
Correct.
I mean, because it's passed down from the government. This is where it comes from, guys. If you could get your act together, maybe everybody else could follow suit. You know what I mean?
Well, it's not a good example. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, it starts at the top and it trickles down, but this is what they want. They want people to remain dumb. They want people to remain, and this isn't. There are obviously people out there that are very smart and that see this happening. But I'm willing to bet, Louis, that the majority of people could really care less as long as they're receiving their entitlements that they want.
Hey,
right?
It goes back to Roman time, right? The bread and the circuses. As long as they're getting theirs, it really doesn't matter. It's only when something goes wrong, well, then they demand an immediate fix. Well, that's perfect when somebody can just step in and say, I can fix it. Give me the power and I'll fix it. And that's what Hitler did, right?
Right.
That always happens. You always look towards, and it makes total sense. Things aren't going well. You're not going to say, well, let's have a debate. You're going to say, no, give me what I need. And if someone comes along and says, I'm going to give you what you need, well, then you vote for them or you give them the power.
Well, and you're going to give me something that I need and I don't have to do anything for it? Oh, that sounds like a win-win, right?
Start it up.
But if somebody came along and said, you know what, these benefits are here for people that really need them. But there's something better for you that you can do, which would maybe, become an entrepreneur or do something business-wise that would give you double or triple the amount of what you're receiving in these benefits to do nothing. But unfortunately, they basically trained, and this is a culture that we have now, Louis, that people are lazy. People don't want to do anything. And as long as the government's there to backstop it, I can only see the middle class becoming the poor. That's
what my point about Russia versus the United States is. Not that Russia's some dynamo economically, but they're more equipped culturally to withstand economic hard times.
Right. Where we don't.
They love Putin.
What hard times.
They're not doing well. The country's doing poorly, but his approval ratings are high. You wouldn't get somebody in the United States who is causing an economic decline to have high ratings. In the United States, a political leader is only popular when the economy's doing well. Now, you got in Russia, the economy's doing worse, and his approval rating's going up. Why? Because they're used to suffering. He didn't promise them 2 televisions and a car and food stamps.
Right. Yeah.
But that's what our politicians do.
Oh, our politicians, yeah. And now that, I mean, as we had mentioned, this is back when I was at the CBS station running a show, and I think we were talking about how the government spent $3 million on radio commercials to push the social agenda of food stamps, right? They spent $3 million on that. Now,
I remember the commercial. There were 2 women talking, and who says, "Oh, you're looking good. What's going on?" "Well, I'm getting food stamps. I'm eating better now." It's like, oh, okay.
And I remember that was probably 2 or 3 years ago, Louis, and you and I laughed. I mean, because that was the beginning of it, and it's just getting worse. They're just going to continue to promote. They want more and more people reliant on the system. They don't want to do anything to help people get away from the system, because guess what? That buys votes. So the next vote that comes around, it's going to be, as you mentioned, that's why I said if a Republican was really smart, They just say, hey, look, we're not going to do anything with your benefits. Matter of fact, we're going to increase it by 25%.
Oh, if both parties are on that gravy train, then you never get any change. Look at the college. I saw a special report. There are college students now, not only indebted, and they will be indebted for life when they graduate, they're literally starving because they don't have enough money because they borrowed all this money to pay for food in college.
Right.
So what do? You put a government program in to make sure they can buy. People don't understand that government involvement in education is why it's gone up 600% in the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah. Well, you know, what I found interesting, too, look, I don't know if you saw, but, you know, I follow sports. I'm a big sports junkie. But the college football now, the top 5 biggest conferences essentially are now given the ability to make their own rules. Like, for the longest time, everybody basically said that everybody knows that, like, college football is basically, you know, this huge for-profit thing and that the athletes should be able to benefit somehow, some way. Well, now the top 5 conferences are officially allowed to have stipends, like for these players, if they sign autographs that are kind of held off to the side, and they're allowed to give them to them after they graduate, essentially, right? Well, it's just kind of this culture that is just changing, ever changing. Where basically, I mean, the whole world obviously is run by money. We already know that, but
that's
now,
fine.
But what
but
I
not
really
money.
think,
money run by the government is different. It's not in
right.
private hands.
But what I found interesting about that whole model is that the education component is really not what people care about. Those athletes are going to school to play sports, not to get an education, right?
Right.
Like, and it just kind of shows you, how much I feel that, you know, this education system is a sham. I mean, it's just, okay, great, you have to go to class in order to go play football, but you're not.
Why? Why does that guy have to go to class? He didn't go to class for 18 years. So now the guy's got to go sit through a college class?
Right, so now
and pretend
what it is,
that
right.
he's an athlete. Face it, that's what he is. He doesn't need to learn about Plato.
And so now they finally have come to the point where now he's going to, he has to show up to class. He probably doesn't matter what grades he gets. And he can now get a stipend. He can now make money from signing autographs and be able to benefit from this, which, you know what, is perfectly fine. It's no different. It's just like an amateur version of you know, professional sports here. This is what college is moving towards. And there's really nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's set out that, you know, that athletes are given an education by scholarship, and that was enough. Well, really, I mean, the education system, you and I have talked in depth about this, Louis. It's flawed to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
it's outdated now.
I mean, I could care less if they just had universities set up for people to play sports. I could care less.
Well, Ryan, if you think about it, that's exactly what it should be, because the educational component can be done at home, can be done for less. It doesn't need to be there. The sport actually is a community-based, stadium-based activity where you do need an environment where everybody goes and cheers the team. Right. College doesn't require you to go on a campus with 20,000 people.
Right.
You don't need to identify with your school. In fact, you shouldn't identify with Harvard or Princeton or whatever school you go to for purposes of what you're learning. You're not learning the history of Harvard. You're learning world history, you're learning American. Whatever you're learning has nothing to do with Harvard. But when you go to a Harvard football game, that's your identity. So
Absolutely.
You can just close down the classes, and Harvard can have a football team.
Well, I think...
And they make more money. They make enough money because they have an endowment, but other colleges can just set up and don't even have classes. Don't even go to the charade. Just register with the collegiate committee and field the football team.
I agree. I mean, I don't think
basketball too, baseball, whatever you want.
Well, whatever sports, but it just shouldn't. It's not. They're essentially using these students as athletes to promote their product, which their product is sports. That's where all their revenue comes from, especially the big schools. They're not making all their money off of education. That's not where it's coming from.
Well, they are. They're making a lot of money off of tuition.
Well, I know, but the bulk of it, you know what I mean? The bulk of revenues that a lot of these schools pull in are from, like, their football teams. You know what I mean? Like, the bulk of it,
the good ones,
millions of dollars. The good ones. And that's why I said it was funny that it was basically the top 5 conferences are the ones that are basically now allowed to make their own rules. Well, they should have been allowed to make their own rules from the very beginning.
Yeah, when someone says, I like St. John's, what do they mean? They mean their basketball team.
Right.
When somebody says, I want to go to St. John's, they don't mean they want to go there and get a St. John's education. They mean they want to go there and cheer on the team.
And do the athletes really care they just want to go somewhere where they can play, right? So it didn't really matter. It wouldn't matter then what school it was. If somebody was going to say, hey, you can come to this school and you don't have to pay for it and you're allowed to play basketball. Yeah, okay, cool, I'm in, right? It was never about, hey, this school seems like they've got a great business administration. That's the reason why I'm going to go there. That's not what happens. I mean, and I know that.
And college has become so politicized that it's not about learning. It's about trying to control the behavior of the students, what they think, what they do, what they say. You're not getting an education there. You're getting indoctrinated and controlled.
Yeah, and, I mean.
And you're paying for it. And you're taking out a government loan to do it, guaranteed, Sally Mae. I mean, I think that college has degenerated to the point it only exists now because of the government, and it would have gone the way of the newspapers. It's the same concept. It's media that now can be delivered for free that they're charging exorbitant prices for.
Right. Yep.
And it's interesting, when the Federal Reserve comes out with a study, I don't know what they have to do with education in college, saying why they did a study why, going to college still makes sense and why it makes sense to indebt yourself for life to go to college, then there's a scam going on.
Yep.
Why is the Federal Reserve issuing a paper on the value of a college education other than to promote the debt that's associated with a college education?
I agree with you. And what would happen if all these people didn't put themselves through this education system or college? They would then potentially be forced to take a job, which earlier on, which is perfectly fine. They the
same job they get when they graduate.
4 years later, right? That's the same job they would
go work in the restaurant now. Starbucks is hiring.
Yeah. Is it any coincidence that many of the success stories that we hear about, Lewis, are people that they failed out of high school, never finished high school. They started a job at 16, 17 years old, failed numerous times in businesses and different jobs, and then all of a sudden created something on their own from their many failures. Never had a college education, but just always found a way to make something happen.
Right, I did a blog post on that. I listed about 40, 50, 60 major brands that were founded by people who either never went or dropped out of college. And then it's Apple, Microsoft, it's tons of companies.
Yeah, but just imagine if as
you unleash the creativity of the younger generation, not in going to school and taking on debt. Your whole mindset changes. You feel limited when you have debt.
Correct.
You don't feel the world is your oyster. You feel, I got to stay here. I got to stay in my parents' house because I don't have any money.
It's a scarcity mindset.
Not trying to change the world. They're trying to do stuff.
Right. You have a scarcity mindset versus that.
Exactly.
Having that abundance where, anything is yours, you can get it. It can be obtained. And that is very dangerous proposition, I feel like, for basically United States political system, Congress, everybody. They don't want people to believe that they can do big things, right?
No, they want to control them. The only colleges that you actually can say if you will go into the funnel and you will do really well are Harvard, Princeton, and Yale, because then you'll end up in banking or government. And those are known positions where you can do well. Every other school that you go to, whether it's a good school or a bad school, there's no automatic ticket to the mainstream elite. So you got to do whatever you want. But you're told, because you have this college education, you're going to do well, and you end up working in Home Depot or somewhere else. There's nothing wrong with that, but you could have done that without going to college.
And, but for the majority of those people that do make it to Harvard and Yale and Princeton, Lewis, I mean, a lot of times that was because they have a family member that knows somebody, right?
Correct.
Like
they're part of a special class, 20% get in, just because they're whatever background they need to let in to get diversity.
Right. So
there's really a limited number of seats at those schools.
Absolutely.
For everybody.
You have to be extremely lucky for the most part to be able to find your way into those schools. So, and for those people, I mean, just think about it. With the access of the Internet, Lewis, I mean, essentially somebody can learn a foreign language, Spanish, Italian, French, whatever it may be. They could probably learn a language in 60 days if they wanted to. With the access to the Internet, they don't need to go to the classroom to do that. And I mean, you could take this back to elementary, middle, and high school where they start teaching this stuff. They draw out Spanish for like 5 or 6 years now.
And you learn how to count after 5 or 6 years, and that's it.
Yeah, I mean, how long you could they always talk about the 80-20 rule, and then they talk about, you could basically learn 20% of a certain words in a certain language and be able to converse with somebody in that language with 20% of all those words, right? So if you just focused and took a class online, they have Rosetta Stone and all the other different programs you could take here, but you could literally learn a language in probably, I'm willing to bet, 30 to 60 days.
You can learn anything. Forget language. You can learn history, art, philosophy, math, science, tons of stuff online. There's the Khan Academy, but Khan Academy is one everyone knows. There's tons of other stuff.
Well, I'm just using language as an example, but more or less anything, right? Just like you said, you can learn a sport, you can learn languages, you can learn math, history. And to go to the classroom when basically now we have the internet, you can look up anything in a matter of seconds, right? Mm-hmm. So if you want to know about history, you can learn a lot more by sitting in front of your computer for 30 minutes versus going for a year worth of classroom time. It's just that's a simple fact. But
and you're more distracted because listening to a lecture with 150 other kids, your attention span is far less. There's other people to look at in the class. You may have brought food with you. You may be hungover, whatever it is. But if you're studying one-on-one with your instructor online, you're going to learn a lot more.
Absolutely. I mean, I can tell
and you're going to pay a lot less. So the only reason that people go to college now is because of the constant propaganda that you have to go, that you're somehow being denied a future if you don't go. Even though all the evidence shows that's not true, but then they bring up their own evidence. You have Hillary Clinton talking about it. Why does the president and Hillary Clinton and the Fed have to talk about the value of education? Do people want it? No, they're telling them what they need. People aren't demanding college education. They're being told they need it.
And if they tell me that I need it and they make the funds available for me to get it, then I must do it, right?
Yep.
Like that's the way it works. Versus if they said, you know what, guys, the new wave of the future is to be creative. You don't need school. You don't need it because ultimately, if they said that, if that was the narrative that they did, the price of tuition would immediately come down, right?
Fewer people would go. Colleges would have to lower their tuition to make themselves more attractive.
We'd have more small businesses, more creative people, entrepreneurs that are out there actually doing things that make us a more productive country overall, right? You wouldn't have to worry about necessarily taxes and unemployment and all these things.
More people would be independent, and that's the last thing they need.
Right. Well, and everything would sort itself out, Louis. It really would. Like, if everything wasn't driven around this, everybody has to be on our education system, which is basically just another way of saying that we just need to brainwash you, and this is the way we're going to do it.
And we're going to charge you to do it, but don't worry if you can't afford it because we'll loan you the money, and that'll stay with you for life.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is the culture that we have created in this country. And
who are you going to vote for, Ryan, when someone says, I'll forgive your debt? Well, that's,
Well, we already know the answer to that, right?
Right.
And especially when those people still don't have jobs. They've been out of college now 4 or 5 years, and they have a part-time job still, right? You're
going to vote for the guy who got you in the trouble in the first place, giving you that education. It's the old, they break your leg, and then they give you a crutch, and they say, without me, you couldn't walk.
And then what happens, Louis, when they come out and they know that all these senior citizens are now working because they're not making enough money from CDs and other basic instruments that the banking system has to be able to even live off of, they're going to say, you know what, we're going to take care of you guys too. We're going to increase, these social benefits by X amount, right?
Yep.
Do whatever they have to do to keep it so that people are basically just living right at the poverty line or right above it. Just enough.
And people have to realize, and this is what Reagan used to say: government isn't the answer. It's not the solution. It's the problem. But the problem is when you have a problem that's caused by government, you naturally look to the government to fix the problem they create, not realizing, that's like you go to a surgeon and he botches the surgery and he takes out a kidney that he shouldn't have taken out, and you go back and say, please put it back in. You don't go back to him.
Right.
You go to another surgeon.
Correct. Yeah. And, when we leave it up to the government to fix problems, they just make more of them.
So that they can fix them. That keeps them in office. If there's no problems, there's no need for them.
Right. I mean,
so they create problems.
Well, yeah, exactly. Obama's answer was to create more infrastructure. That's what's going to create jobs. That's wrong. That's the wrong answer. How about they can't even set a budget. They don't even know what that means. So if we were talking in terms of an average American, and they bring in $500 a month. They can't spend $600 like you guys. They can't. Right? No, they might be.
Well, that's like, Ryan, we have a $500 budget, and then we say, well, it'd be really good for our economy, meaning our family economy, if we built an extension on the house. Well, sure. But where are you going to get the money from? Don't worry about it.
No, you need to repave the driveway. Well,
sure you do.
Yeah,
you need to repave the driveway.
Yeah, I mean, because, with the United States.
Someone might get a job if I do that.
Correct. Now, if
everybody did that, then the economy would roar. Everyone would go out and repave your driveways. I saw a thing, Ryan, where they had they were complaining that people driving has been reduced. The amount of gas being used has been reduced. And you can just see the Keynesian response, which is, okay, we're going to mandate that all the big box stores move 20 miles further so people drive more. That's the mentality here, is that somehow they can make work. Right. Not what people want, but they can kind of force labor. They can force projects that there is no demand for.
Correct. Yep.
And that's going to fix the economy, instead of letting people do what they would naturally do. And the question is, you don't know what people would naturally do. They don't like that. That's an uncertain thing. You don't know what people would naturally do. Yeah. People don't wake up in the morning when they're 14 and say, I got to go to college. They've been told that.
Right.
That's not something you would even think at 14 years old.
Right. I guess it's better off to be certain that you're going to be broke, but to have just enough money to get food than being uncertain about everything, right?
Right. Because everybody else is going to be broke, and everybody else is going to be living at home paying off the debt.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it really is. I mean, overall, it's just the culture that has been created, and it's just the trickle-down effect of stupidity. I mean, it starts at the top, and until they're willing to fix it, I don't see anything changing. It's not like the average American, when they want to go put in their new driveway, they can go tap on the Federal Reserve and say, hey, I need some money. I'll give it back to you later, right?
Or I won't give it back to you. I'll just print up more and
pay
you back with the amount I sent up.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you for $10,000 this time. I'll be back next month for $5,000. I'll be back the next month for $10,000. Because essentially that's what the United States can do. They can continue to print this money as quickly and as fast as they really want to.
And you get people who think they're sophisticated economists, and they say, well, Ryan and Lewis, you guys are just ignoramuses. A government isn't like a household. Yeah, of course it isn't, because that's your definition of government, that it can spend 200% of GDP, and it doesn't matter. And they say, well, look at Japan. Yeah, look at Japan. It's a basket case. They give these examples just because they exist, that somehow it's okay.
It's the classic of just avoid, right? Like, pay attention to somebody else. It's not as bad here.
That's a classic argument, right? That's the Bush did it or Obama did it. Not focusing on what you did is wrong. You just have to say somebody else did something wrong, and it's fine.
And focusing on everybody else and not worrying about yourself is a losing proposition, because at some point it's going to catch
responsibility.
Up to it.
Yep.
And
it already has.
Yeah.
But we're still trumpeting, and I heard Michelle Obama the other day talking about the richest nation on earth, and it should be able to. No, it's not the richest nation on earth. Don't start his sentence with that.
Right. We've got enough liabilities on our sheet to probably make us one of the poorest countries.
We are the largest debtor nation ever in the history of the world.
Yep.
That's a fact. But the American mindset is, well, that doesn't matter. Well, if you owe that much money, yeah, but that's different. You're stupid. You don't understand. People are different than governments.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting times. But we're coming up on the end of the show, Lewis. I want to thank you again for coming on. I know you mentioned your blog a couple times. If you wouldn't mind giving our listeners your blog so they can check out those blog posts as well, we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan. It's smallgold.com. There's a blog post up every few days on real estate, Federal Reserve, the gold and silver market, so please check it out at smallgold.com. You can also follow Smallgold on Twitter at smallgold.
Thanks, Lewis. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ryan.
You guys for tuning in. If you'd like, please download, subscribe, share on iTunes, Real Estate 360. You can download all the previous episodes there, as well as if you can stream it directly from the website at realestate360live.com. Also, there's an Ask a Question button on the right-hand side for any questions that you may have or topics that you would like us to cover on future episodes. So until next time, take care.